Hello everyone, it's Jin'taan here and welcome to my monthly Patron's Choice video. The topic here, as always, is decided by a poll on my Patreon, which is filled with suggestions from my supporters. So if you want to have your own say in what weird or wonderful thing I make a video about next month that branches outside my usual news, interviews and articles, even $1 gives you the same vote as everyone else. This time, we're going to be doing something that I've never tried to do before, and that's to predict rather than report on major events that might go down in the coming year. Predictions are obviously kind of a crapshoot in anything really, because if someone could reliably predict the future, they probably wouldn't be telling you about it in the first place. They'd just be placing a lot of discrete bets and trading in the right stocks. But that's doubly the case in EVE Online, where the amount of hidden information is absolutely vast, and is something that bigger players are absolutely happy to leverage to their advantage, with everything from pretending to be enemies with someone to secret backroom payoffs not being conspiracies in the political landscape, but things that have provably happened before and almost certainly will happen again. Still, with that disclaimer out of the way, and this being the first week of the Year of the Rat, I hope you'll find these predictions interesting, if only as a way to show you what areas of the game I have my eye on right now, rather than being a guide to the future. Speaking of the Lunar New Year, let's start with the nationality most keenly impacted by it, and the newest one to reach tranquility, the Chinese. Now, the politics of 2019 were heavily impacted by the waves of migration from Serenity to Tranquility, as the Winter Coalition challenged Legacy for the dominance of the southeast, and the war in Tinal, where Ranger Regiment backed by Dead Coalition has faced off against other Chinese alliances in Veni Vidi Vici and the Stars of the Northern Moon, who are backed by PanFam. That impact isn't something that I expect to fall off in 2020, far from it. But what I think we will see is the formation of not only new alliances as even more remnants cross over to Tranquility, but a second Chinese-led coalition. The reason for that is fairly simple, as despite their loss in the last war, Winter Coalition is still one of the most powerful forces in the Chinese time zone, and as they continue to find refuge in Oasa and rebuild what losses their supercapital fleet took, they are going to present a real threat to any developing Chinese alliances that aren't a part of their coalition, especially those that are historically PIBC linked, given the extreme animosity between them following the events that caused Winter to move to Tranquility in the first place. That threat isn't even entirely theoretical, as one can see both from the constant clashes between Army of Mangoes and Winter in the southeast, and their purported promise to intervene in any supercapital fight that took place in Tinal during their time zone. Alongside this, the majority of Chinese leaders that I've had the opportunity to speak to have repeatedly demarcated their independence as partners or something similar within their current parent coalitions, with the most notable of that being Army of Mangoes, who reached out to correct me after I referred to them as a member of Legacy, following them being gifted Omist by said coalition. I think that independent streak is something that's going to probably, somewhat ironically, bring them together if enough pressure starts being placed on these disparate alliances. I don't really have a good enough grasp on the details of the inter-alliance politics here to guess what alliances would be left in or out of that circle, but as they start to mature and gain supercapital fleets of their own that they want to leverage, it's going to be nearly a necessity for them to work together in order to do so. The real question mark, I suppose, is whether or not this coalition decides to politically or militarily take new space. There's plenty of relatively fallow regions right now, but they aren't exactly ideal homes for people to PvE in, or places that hold long-term viability, at least from my admittedly limited perspective on what a good region is. Still, more players on the map would mean more complexity, and the more complex the political system, the more likely people are to go to war, and that's something I, for obvious reasons, am always hoping to see more of. After all, peace is a remarkably boring thing to report on. So, moving on to my second big prediction for 2020, and one where you might accuse me of copping out a little because I'm not going to predict a massive war, but rather something, again, a bit more subtle and political. And that's the breakup of the power block that has defined the post-UALX period of EVE Online politics, Imperial Legacy. Now, official blue standings between the Imperium and Legacy haven't existed for a long time, but both of them have fought on the same side in practically every war since 2018, until the very latest war in Tenal, where the Imperium has supported the defense of Dead Coalition, and Legacy has gone on the offensive. This, I think, represents the first potential crack in the partnership that has allowed the two coalitions to dominate the game, with both of them effectively securing the other's borders in one direction and allowing them to expand in opposite directions, now holding half the map between them within their spheres of influence, contributing to the often complained about blue donut. But with the Imperium and Legacy now arguably being the most and second most powerful coalitions on the map, and the glassing of the North and Legacy Winter War having further crippled their longtime enemies, I don't think that there's a threat which necessitates this political friendliness continuing. In fact, it's entirely possible that the two allies represent the biggest threats to one another that remains on the map. All of this is very much reading the tea leaves, but I have to say that I don't predict a direct war between them in 2020, as this partnership will probably take a while to break down, simply due to the inertia that it currently has, and only after it's broken down could some big dramatic event really spark an actual conflict between the two, as given how close the centres of both groups' economies are, it's still in both sides' best interests not to go to war without something actually necessitating it. Delve is not better enough than Esoteria to make risking it all on a war worth it, and the Imperium certainly doesn't want to repeat the mistakes of the CFC and overextend its territory to the point of collapse a second time. If I had to put a date on when the actual war might take place, the summer of 2021 would seem like as good of a date as any, but really it's just going to come down to factors that are outside of the control of the two empires. Perhaps an attack from another entity leaves one coalition open to a surprise attack. Maybe one decides to try and really exert more political dominance over the other and goes too far for it to be tolerated. Or hell, maybe CCP actually makes invading people fun and rewarding again. Whatever ends up kicking this off though, it's undeniably going to be one of the single bloodiest wars in EVE Online history, with multiple backup supercapital fleets from both sides, making clashes like BTAC R5 almost expected, rather than a once-in-a-lifetime convalescence of people being in the right place at the right time whilst the wrong thing has happened. For my next prediction, we're going to need to pull ourselves back from the brutally ruthless in-game political landscape and to the equally brutal and ruthless one that exists outside of it, but will impact it all the same. I am, of course, referring to the one which exists inside CCP Games' Boardroom, because in 2020 I expect Hilmar's role as the face of EVE Online to become more and more de-emphasised. Now, don't expect him to suddenly disappear and be the same level of disconnected CEO that he was perceived to be in 2016 and 17 when he was managing CCP's expansion into VR and preparing for the Pearl Abyss buyout. It's clear that EVE is still his baby. But for the past year and a half he's been filling the transitional executive producer role that Unifex has historically taken in the company, whilst new leaders such as CCP Burger and a few others have been given time to develop and grow into their new positions, whilst not having to take the job of presenting everything directly to the community. But with the new quadrant-based release system headed up and announced by Burger firmly underway, it seems to me like we'll start to see the reins of control over EVE's direction start to be handed back. And there are a few other outside factors that I think will be influencing this too, with the financial targets placed on CCP by Pearl Abyss following their acquisition of the company most likely maturing in September of this year, which will mark 2 years since the acquisition deal. Without that financial incentive to cut costs and drive revenue, I think we'll start to see the exact same patterns that we've always seen from Hilmar as a CEO, with him driving to invest and expand into new fields of technology with CCP. After all, there have been huge developments in augmented reality as well as virtual reality in the few years since CCP was a market leader in those areas, and I doubt he'll be content to not be on the bleeding edge of games technology development. Now, you should still expect him to turn up and pay attention to the EVE community, and I'm sure he'll be presenting a section at all of the keynotes he possibly can, if only to tell the story about losing his friend's thorax for the 15th time. But FanFest this year is going to be where this prediction is put to the test. Personally, I expect it will be Burger, not Hilmar, who is presenting the vision to the player base of where EVE will be in a year's time, and charting a course of how we will get there. And if we don't see that from either Hilmar or Burger, well, I'm gonna be very worried. Now, as I look at all of these predictions in order, I realise that going down the list, things are getting less and less certain as we go on, even under the caveat of me trying not to hedge my bets and just going with what I really do think will happen. As now we turn our attention to one of the hardest things to understand, let alone predict the outcome of, an ongoing war. Specifically, I'm referring to the Tenal War between Dead Coalition and PanFam, where I expect PanFam to win, although said victory is going to come with a lot of asterisks, for many reasons that make these block-level wars feel relatively pointless to a casual observer. First of all, whilst PanFam has been able to grind out a decent chunk of Tenal so far, the process of doing so has taken nearly 2 months. And unlike the war in the southeast, where the primary contested region of Detorid was Winter Coalition's primary home, Tenal is a less important territory to Dead Coalition as a whole, with their supercapital fleet not even being directly staged within the region. That means that in order to cripple Dead Coalition's ability to project capital power into the theatre and secure any conquests is going to require PanFam to push into Branch as well. And whilst the successful installation of a Fortizar in that staging system of 5-tac P does show that it's something that's being planned for, I doubt it's going to be feasible in the next month or so. This long timescale and focus on day in, day out grinding is something that really plays into how Sword Dragon, from my perspective, has historically run wars, especially defensive ones, which is by dragging them out and forcing his opponents to fight for every inch, in an attempt to bring them to the negotiating table, and then winning the peace that follows, with recent examples being his initial attacks on the DRF, and their defense against the Imperium. Adding on to that is the fact that fundamentally, PanFam both can't and shouldn't really want to occupy the entirety of Dead Coalition's territory. Not only would it be incredibly difficult to do so, nearly doubling the amount of regions they directly hold, but it also isn't something that would benefit them either, as they already have their core PvEing territory nestled under a supercapital umbrella in the northeast. The years of just holding regions to secure their passive income from moons, or to rent out great swaths of territory that are protected by the threat of your supercapital fleet turning up to defend it, are kind of behind us. So whilst it's likely that PanFam will want to add Tenal to their holdings in order to gift to their Chinese allies, I don't foresee them pushing deep into Dead Coalition territory unless they find some entity that's willing to install itself there and hold off a counterattack from Deadco independently. So, barring the slim possibility of a complete collapse of Dead Coalition's constituent alliances over war-related drama, I see a victory here being signalled in much the same way it was in the Imperium-Deadco war, with an acknowledgement of the attacking force's superiority and a few political and strategic concessions, along with some form of tithe that will allow PanFam to claim, that it was all worth it. I doubt it's going to be faction Fortizars this time, as relatively few of those are left, but maybe it'll be in the form of supercapitals or just raw risk, who really knows on that front. In short, I don't think the conclusion of this conflict will change the map nearly as much as the Legacy Winter War did, just due to the simple lack of motivation on either side for a huge shift to occur in the first place. Finally, we get to my last and most speculative of all of the predictions, and this one concerns what is probably the most important aspect of modern EVE power politics, the ability of a coalition to leverage their economic power into both military and political power and thus impact the map. Specifically, what I think we'll see as 2020 begins to roll on and the war in Tenal winds down is the resurgence of PanFam as a force that can impact practically anywhere on the map and make their presence felt. Following the glassing of the North in early 2019, PanFam has been relatively quiet, although relatively is a term I am using in the literal sense there, given that they've involved themselves heavily in the Legacy Winter War, eventually forming the PandaFam bloc as a result, and started up the Tenal War we talked about just a few moments ago. But these are all still local conflicts and a far cry from the map-roaming nomadic group that they were in 2017 and 18. The reason for this stepping back, in my opinion, has been the adoption of a delve-like system centered on Maopei, with a few notable differences, such as the active content reserve in Horde space being used to keep their new players trained and entertained, rather than creating an equivalent to the QFC. But as this economic system has matured, with Kalevala and Maopei totaling over 2 trillion ISK mined in December, the resultant influx of materials should begin to drive down the local cost of supercapitals. Whilst it will probably take more time for PanFam to reach tactical supercapital parity with the Imperium, given their insane head start and much clearer focus on it, what I think we will see is enough saturation of supercapital ownership within the coalition for them to start to be able to use multiple deployment groups of supercapitals, rather than just having their own umbrella and a few alliances being able to move independently outside of it. Now, it's difficult to suggest where they might go if they do decide to try something like this out, given the slow expansion of blocks around the map, but Tribute, Providence and Cloud Ring are all far enough away from opposing block-level supercapital fleets that they might be potential targets for testing. Still, in a post-Tenal War Eve, who knows how the map might actually look, given that my own predictions there might not pan out, so we could see them go practically anywhere. So that's all my chips on the roulette board that is EVE politics. If you agree, disagree, or want to plant your flag and predict something yourself, please do so in the comments. After all, so many people claim that events in EVE were obviously going to happen, but can never really point to themselves having called it out beforehand, and I'd hate for you to miss the opportunity to say, "I told you so." A special thanks as always goes out to our Crassuses, Pinche Infidel from Old School, Brood from Triumvirate, Zolka Lando, and Jessica, as well as to our other $5 and above patrons in January Valentine, Ketzark Odin, Big Bada Boom, Zar, Dunk Dinkle, Miss Moses, Rafael Dordiens, Kem, and the Ashval Federation. If you want to join them in supporting the channel yourself, you can either check out the Patreon link in the description below, or if you'd like, just share the video with someone who you think might enjoy it. Until next time, have a good day and fly smart.